It is noon on the East Coast in New York, and I think it's time to get started. Welcome, everyone, to today's discussion. We're excited to dive into Agentic AI and how it's making an impact, the potential pitfalls users should be aware of, and where we see the future of AI in capital markets. Joining me today are Joshua Pantony, the CEO and co-founder of Boosted, and George Hinin, a solutions manager here at Boosted. I'm your moderator, Geoff Clauss, the Chief Revenue Officer at Boosted. My background is in technology for finance, today commonly known as fintech. Today, I'll be deferring most of the conversation to the two experts who are joining me. Josh has 15 years of experience in AI, beginning his first company, a natural language processing company, when he was in university, and ultimately selling it to Microsoft. Josh then went on to become a machine learning engineer and build some machine learning models for Bloomberg before co-founding Boosted in 2017. 2017 was a long time ago, long before most people thought of AI as a buzzword or as commonplace. George, known by many of our clients as he's onboarded and supported many of them over the years, is an expert with regards to client service and financial modeling. George is become our resident expert in driving successful AI partnerships with our clients through our new agentic platform, Alpha. As we wait a minute here for folks to join in, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank our audience for the questions that have already been shared, and to remind everybody joining that you can ask questions directly through the chat of today's event. There's a QR code on the top of your screen. You can simply scan that and add questions in real time. We'll also be sending a recording after the call. If you want to chat about anything afterwards, you can scan that QR code and get directly to us. With that said, I think we're just about ready to get started. Josh, George, are we ready?
Good on my side.
Sounds good.
Fantastic. Let's begin with some success stories around Agentic AI. But before we get into those success stories, Josh, could you please just take a moment to quickly define what is Agentic AI and how is that different from other forms of AI that people may be more familiar with, like generative AI or even overall machine learning?
Yeah, the biggest way I like to draw a distinction is when you think about most generative AI systems like ChatGPT, a lot of them work by you ask a question and you get a response. And usually the kind of work that gets achieved is the kind of work that can be done in under a minute. You're looking for a specific answer. When I think about agentic AI, I think about it in terms of more long-range work. Often for us, it's some kind of continuous work. So as an example, with a chat-based system, you might be able to ask, what are macro effects that are occurring right now? With an agentic system, you might say, continuously scan through all information you can find and tell me about any emerging macro threats that could impact my portfolio. Or continuously evaluate this particular thesis around these particular two stocks and tell me if you find any information that can change that thesis. Or continuously look for any potential spike in risk to an M&A deal. And so it's that ability to kind of do work on a continuous basis and then come back with things that matter to you. That's very distinguished. The way I sort of put that in one pithy sentence is, with generative AI, you prompt the system. With agentic AI, the system prompts you.
Wow. Okay. So as somebody who's spent a career in working with asset managers, wealth managers, sovereigns, really anyone overseeing assets and deploying technology that created efficiencies or benefits to how they operate, it really sounds like agentic AI is a game changer in terms of what it's able to do for that space, whether it be an investment manager, financial professional, or really anybody responsible for the entity's corporate health or competitive positioning. Can you share some real world examples of how customers are seeing success with the technology today? Like in terms of what's standing out in terms of tangible results?
You want me to take that, or maybe George?
That'd be great, Josh. What if we leave with you?
All right, sounds good. Yeah, I kind of see it as having sort of three high-level types of value that we're giving our users. So value number one is basically automating drudgery, right? And you can think of a bunch of different variations of that. Maybe you have to do something like write market commentary on what happened over the market over the past 3 weeks. The system can scan through everything happening in your portfolio, all the little micro effects in a quantitative way, all the macro effects, and generate a really quick summary of here's what you might want to write about, and here's a bunch of context, and here's a bunch of citations. Or maybe you have a task related to, every time a 10K or 10Q comes out, you need to summarize that 10K or 10Q in relation to material changes, or maybe something happening with a lawsuit, or looking for any kind of FINRA notes or something like that. Or maybe you just have to write an investment thesis for every stock that you put into your portfolio. All those kinds of examples are things that we can help speed up massively. The second type of value is really related to monitoring, right? So maybe you teach the system how you like to think about a particular trade. Or maybe you're, the M&A example I like to talk about, because I actually don't know how people survived before they had our system. If you are someone who does M&A arbitrage and you put a trade on and something happens that increases the spike in risk to that deal, you've got very little time to react to that information. Using our technology, you could have the system scan through every 8K, every 4K, every piece of news, everything being talked about from the regulators. And the second something happens that affects the probability of that M&A deal occurring, the system could notify you real time. And then the third category is what I like to describe as sort of giving our users superpowers. So this is things where it's a completely net new way of viewing the world, in which way you couldn't really do before. To give like a very specific example, a few weeks ago, when the NVIDIA chip delay occurred, a natural question you might ask is, what are the actual effects of that? And I think in the current world, you would analyze that by looking at sell-side reports, maybe talking to some experts in the expert network, maybe looking at what management was talking about, but you're a little bit limited in terms of the content information you can look at. With a system like ours, you can go out, read through the earnings calls, 10Ks, 10Qs, whatever, of thousands of companies all at once, summarize the main high-level macro trends and the main high-level knock-on effects that the chip delay affects, and then also summarize if, on average, companies are talking about NVIDIA in a positive way or a negative way. Kind of a related but slightly different example is maybe there's some kind of financial ratios you care about. And today, it can be a little bit difficult to kind of understand what happened in the past versus what's happening today. You might use our system to figure out, when was XYZ company most profitable over the past 20 years, scan through every piece of information of what was happening the last time it was really profitable, learn at a high level effect what was occurring there, and then actually have the system compare that to what's happening today. So these are examples of processes where either it's completely net new, you straight up could not do it before this technology existed, or it's just saving you a huge amount of time. So circling it back, automating drudgery, monitoring the world on a continuous basis, and then superpowers, adding something completely net new that you actually could not do without this technology.
It sounds like a massive time savings and an opportunity to be able to accomplish tasks that we may not have been able to before. Excellent. George, I have a question for you. You work closely with the end users, the beneficiaries of this technology every day. Can you share how your customers are interacting with the Agentic AI or even integrating it into their workflows? And what's been the most surprising area where they've seen some of these benefits?
Yeah, I actually think it fits pretty well with what Josh was saying with automating drudgery, monitoring, and then enhancing your overall processor superpowers. But maybe before I go into the most surprising, I'll like say that generally when you approach the platform, you get access to a massive amount of financial data that you don't find elsewhere. So we have access to earnings, we have access to SEC filings, we have access to over 7,000 different like time series data sets coming from the Fed, S&P, and so on. And so one of the massive things that you're able to do is you're able to leverage that whenever we come to one of these processes, such as like automating a task that you have or trying to review something. And so I'd say like as soon as people typically join the platform, the first type of task that they start to do is automating something out in their typical day. So that might be like reviewing earnings calls or trying to approach certain sets of news, get highlights of what has changed in the world. Those are all relatively easy use cases that the system can do that you can't do elsewhere. And the benefit is it'll monitor it and it'll run it every single day. One of the really cool examples that we've seen over time is something that's really difficult for people nowadays to do is SEC filings. Typically, they're poorly formatted, and it takes a lot of time to go out, read an SEC filing, and then find out specifically the type of content that you're looking for and compare it to other SEC filings. One of the cool things that I've seen clients do is if we can read every single SEC filing, 8K proxy statement that has come out for an industry group, what can we say is happening? What are some like highlights that are relevant to me? And maybe what are some like trends / patterns that I'm seeing within that industry group that is relevant to my research or my fundamental analysis of that industry? And so to me, that's one of those superpowers that Josh is talking about, where we typically start with, let's save you some easy use cases, let's save you some time. And then once we have you onboarded to those, let's find you those areas where we can add some superpowers to your process of what can we do now that you used to never be able to do before. And so SEC filings and bringing in your custom documents are two ways that we typically approach them. We can talk about that. Yeah, also in more detail as we talk about some more use cases further on.
Excellent. Thank you, George. It's fun for me just to think about how much we've evolved. I think about trying to scan or even find SEC filings 10, 15 years ago. And now, in a matter of a click, you can get an entire sector analysis brought to your desktop. Understanding those benefits and how clients are seeing that, let's shift a little bit to thinking about some of the common themes you're seeing across industries or client types when it comes to the adoption of the agentic AI. What are some of those things where you would think? George, let's start with you.
Yeah, I think that typically when someone comes to AI, I think there's one of two reasons that you are coming to us, or maybe both. It's either looking to enhance the depth of your analysis. So how can you use our platform in a way that you can do more research or cover more names or try and get better analysis of the names that you cover? The second reason that people will use our system is the breadth of your analysis. So how can you cover more names than you previously used to cover? Or maybe let's say you're monitoring NVIDIA and the AI landscape for NVIDIA, but you want to monitor what is happening across the entire competitive landscape of AI. So you're not just looking at NVIDIA now, but you're curious, if I could monitor every single company playing in the AI space and every sort of development that they make, what is what is relevant to the name that I'm holding? That is something that we're now able to do. So I think the two main themes that I've seen happening within the industry are people are coming to us either to enhance the depth of their analysis or trying to come to us from the perspective of, I currently cover these names, how can I get better breadth in terms of covering more names and making sure that I'm monitoring anything that can either degrade or validate my overall investment thesis when it comes to a name.
Excellent. How about you, Josh? Are you seeing additional themes across different industries or client types when it comes to adoption?
I think the thing that's like most exciting for me is actually just how broad the use cases are and even how broad the personas are. When we first started this journey, I'd say like a lot of our early users were primarily quantamental. Right now, I'd say start this journey, we're talking way back in 2020. And then we started getting into a few different fundamental areas. Today, you know, we can absolutely help with doing bottom-up analysis. But you also start to see groups that are, you know, more on like the investor relations side, or you're seeing more macro use cases, or you're seeing people think about this in terms of evaluating the credit risk of businesses in the fixed income space and thinking about how that can affect corporate pricing. So I think the most exciting thing for me is once you give users the ability to kind of download their brain into the machine and then scale up that thinking, the amount of efficiencies that you can unlock starts to increase really, really rapidly. For me, really the only commonality I would say is it's generally speaking like a lot of very early adopters and tech forward people that are adapting this technology, seeing a huge amount of value. And then that's creating, I think, a lot of space for other early adopters to still get a big benefit as we start to approach the really big bulge in the center and get, the wider and wider adoption.
Makes great sense. I join a lot of client calls these days and speak with a lot of people across all industries related to the adoption of new technology. One of the areas of concern that generally comes up are what are the pitfalls or challenges that we face? Josh, to you, a question for you. When adopting new technology, we know that it has its challenges, but what are some of the more common pitfalls that you see users facing when it comes to adopting agentic AI? And more so, how can they overcome some of these challenges that they face?
Yeah, I'd kind of put it into a few different categories. I'd say one of the first things, which we're also improving in our side, is just trying to be a little more specific about what your objectives are. I'd say like there's kind of two main types of users that are getting directed right now. There's people that are just kind of interested in AI, and then there's people where they have very specific use cases in mind. And I think generally speaking, if we can meet with folks, understand their process, understand their pain points, and then build out automations that just make life easier, make life a little bit better, the probability of success tends to be a lot higher. Whereas it's been really interesting. We've had clients that have come in where they've said, hey, this is something that I do with my current workflow. We build an automation that does literally exactly that. So imagine a use case where it's like, all right, I want you to analyze the earnings calls for all the companies in my watch list. Okay, we do a phenomenal analysis. We come back with a conclusion, and then the user says, oh, but you know what? I'm still going to listen to that earnings call, right? Like it's such an important company. I'm just going to analyze it. Well, we probably didn't do a very good job of finding your initial use case. Instead, if we looked at that and said, okay, what are some things you would have loved to have been able to do today? Maybe you'd like to be able to look at all the earnings calls for companies not in your watch list. You'd be able to look at things that are happening upstream or downstream of the company. Maybe you'd like to be able to, look at what management said that's different from what the sell side is saying. Maybe you'd like to look at things that management said that's different from what they said in the last call. Things like that are kind of harder tasks that you would have loved to be able to do, but you just couldn't do today because it was challenging or difficult. That's where we tend to have a little more success. So I just sort of say, like, instead of just thinking about this in terms of, okay, here's what I do on a day-to-day basis, thinking about it in terms of either here's some pain in my life that I'm hoping AI can eliminate, or here's some things that I know I should be doing. I know I should be looking at the earnings calls of other peers. I know I should be looking at the earnings calls of people up or down the street, but there's 30 different earnings calls in a night. I can't look at all of them. And so I'm just not doing those in my process. Those are great areas where AI can come and be really value add. On the flip side, if you just think about it in terms of replicating your daily process, you may not be getting as much value as when you're finding these other kind of like key initiatives you can do. So just really succinctly making sure that you have a solid use case in terms of how you're deploying AI can be one of the most important things to having success.
It's fantastic. And Josh, I think they say an hour of planning saves 10 hours of work. I think that's thematically in the same arena that we're talking about here, really understanding what you're trying to achieve and going after it. George, I know that when I adopt new technology, I tend to make a lot of mistakes. And I like to do things by trial and error. But you, as the person responsible for success and really driving our clients to help get them onboarded and successful in an efficient manner to avoid those frustrations that I tend to steer myself into, what are some of the biggest mistakes that new adopters make when they start working with agentic AI? And what are your strategies? How do you help to guide them through those early learning curves?
Yeah, I think agentic AI is interesting in that it still has the word AI, so everyone assumes that it's typical to other AIs, but I think the way you approach it is actually very, very different. I think people who like used other chat interfaces or large language models, typically the experience that they've had up until now is you ask a question and you get an answer, and that's like the end of your process. And I think that people, when they see another chat interface, that's typically what they assume is in front of them. I think our system in agentic AI as a whole has the ability to answer Q&A, but that is actually doing it a disservice in terms of like what it's able to do for you. It can actually do way more beyond that. So similar to what Josh was saying with reading the 30 earnings calls that are upstream companies, I think that is an example of like you don't simply just want Q&A. You want to create a process or a workflow for yourself where this is something that is going to run for you every single day. you've asked it one question, or you've told it this one process you want it to follow. And then moving forward, it'll let you know, hey, yesterday there was 30 earnings calls. Today there's 25. Tomorrow there's 40. And these are the things that you should watch out for, because this is how it's going to impact the names in your holdings. And so to me, that is where agentic AI is different from like what people have previously seen. And I think that the way we typically approach it when a client gets onboarded is, I think to what Josh is saying, like tech forward people, first adopters are going to benefit the most. But the thing I'd also say is our team is there in the sense of like, regardless of who this is or your comfort with technology, we are there from the standpoint of we build agents for you. We try and showcase exactly how this works. We'll understand your process. We'll do discovery about how exactly do you invest on a day-to-day process, and then what are the types of agents that we can then bring in for you that will produce the most value for you. And the more we ultimately learn about someone's process, the more we can teach that agent to think like them and then get them results that are ultimately tailored to them. So it's really a two-step process. It's one, let's find the workflows that you do in your day-to-day that we can automate and help you out with, and how we can add value. And then the second is, let's try and take what's in your brain, teach it to the machine in a way that whatever it produces is ultimately the most value add for you. And so that's where my team comes in and tries to build out those agents for each of our clients.
That is extremely helpful, George, and it actually brings up a concept in my own mind that I've learned over the years. Back in prior technologies I used, we really focus on the interaction of the human and the machine. The reality is AI is not going to take anyone's job or put us out of business. What it's going to do is it's going to help us become better at what we do, more efficient, or provide us access to more information. So with that in mind, how important is that human to AI collaboration? And Josh, maybe you want to speak to this, but what are some examples of where users are either relying too heavily on the AI without properly guiding or managing it? And how do we ensure that that doesn't happen so that we can have the most effective use of these machines to make us better, more powerful, and leaders in our industries?
Yeah, I mean, so we mostly focus on providing our products to professionals. We, generally speaking, analysts, portfolio managers, professional investment managers. But the sort of corollary comment to that is, the way I think about AI is that it's both has to be very good at sort of understanding the user need, coming to a conclusion, and it has to be extremely auditable. It has to be very transparent and obvious exactly why it's making decisions and where that decisioning came from. And the reason is because every investment process is actually very idiosyncratic. You can come into our system and you can say, show me 5 good stocks, and it'll do its absolute best to answer that question. But the reality is it's probably going to get a very poor result because you have a very specific definition of what 5 good stocks means. It's different at every firm, and not even that, it could be different at different pods at the same firm, right? Maybe you're someone who focuses on biotech, and you've got a belief about different disease vectors, and you want companies with the best IP related to those disease vectors. Maybe you're a company that focuses on gold trading. You like to look at resource statements, and you want to find out which company can extract gold cheap or expensive. Maybe you're a company that focuses on bottom-up analysis or classical GARP trading or whatever it is. There's a huge variety of how people approach the task of trading on stocks. And to have success working with a machine, you have to teach the machine a little bit about how you think. The machine needs to be able to give you very concise and clear, auditable steps in how it understood that thought, and then you need to work together to get an output that makes the most sense. And so from our standpoint, I see it as a very collaborative process where we like to focus on professionals that have some defined process, because then that ability to audit the machine really synergizes well with the ability for the human to sort of teach it what its process looks like. I'd say the corollary comment to that, though, is just like when you onboard a new analyst and you need to teach that new analyst how you think about the world, machines are not magical. They can be very, very intelligent, very smart. They can scale up their thinking, but you need to teach that machine how you think, just like you would with a new person. And so for us, it's really just about taking certain drudgery making it really fast, really optimal, scaling it up. But when you have a system that's capable of doing that, it really shines when it works with the human, and the human teaches it how to think. That's when you get this beautiful sort of outcome, and we're seeing the most success with our clients.
Yeah, it's funny, Josh, as you were going through that, all I'm thinking is this sounds just like when I bring on a new employee.
Yep.
You could hire the most qualified, perfect on paper employee, but until they get integrated into your process, into your system, into your investment thesis, they're not ready. So that's a great example of this. That's fantastic. So now we've got an understanding of what agentic AI is, a little bit of the background. We've talked a little bit about some of the pitfalls and concerns. I'm really interested in hearing your opinions on where is this technology? Where is agentic AI going in finance? So, Josh, what were some of the things that are most exciting to you about the future?
Yeah. I mean, I think number one, the system's already very valuable, but it's baby tech compared to what's coming. I would probably assess it at operating right now at about the level of a new grad out of university. So it's a new grad out of university where its cost of labor is basically zero compared to the amount of value you can get out of it, right? I think when we worked it out, it works out to about 40 cents an hour in terms of work when you compare it to a human. So it's a new grad, but it costs about 40 cents an hour that you can have run just huge amounts of work. But it's going to get better. It's going to get to being more at the level of, someone with a few years of experience. It's going to get better at learning the user process. It's going to get better at learning how our users think about the world. And I think ultimately today, the system, you still come in, you talk to it, you teach it, and then it scales. I want to get it to the point where it's a little bit more natural, where it feels like someone that's just sitting on the desk beside you, where it's constantly learning from you based on your interactions. And then from there, learns what matters to you and can kind of more proactively suggest automations and proactively reach out to you and say, hey, here's some of these you want to do. To put it more simply, today you have to teach the system. Tomorrow, the system's going to be able to teach itself. And the end result of that will mean you just press a button and your life's going to get better. So we're already getting a huge unlock right now, but I'm actually more excited about where it's going to be in 6 months, 12 months. The pace of this is absolutely incredible. I like to talk about this in terms of when I got started in 2009, we used to train our models on 100,000 words. That was a lot of data back then. Today, our system consumes 100,000 words of context in probably every 100 milliseconds or so. So just to kind of put that into scope. And so the kind of capabilities that unlock as these systems can learn more and faster, it's just getting so incredibly exponential. It's beyond crazy. So yeah, I'm excited about the system getting smarter, faster, and being able to integrate even easier than it is today.
Yeah, it's fun. This reminds me early in my career with cloud computing. It was slow, it was lagging, these circles spinning while you're waiting for things. And people just kept telling me, wait, it's only going to get better. And here we are now. You referenced 2009, which is halfway between the beginning and now. And now you look at today, it's boom, lightning fast. It's truly inspiring to see where we are and what's ahead of us. Uh, as we continue to look ahead, there is a lot of buzz around AI transforming the world, including the finance world. How are people expected to prepare for that future now, and how can they see themselves set up for success in that future? George, you want to get us kicked off? Then we'll shift over to.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, I think it's funny because I think it's possible that people hear the most exciting things are going to happen in 6, 12 months, and they think, okay, I'll hold off till 6 or 12 months, and that's when I'll start using AI. I actually think that to me that's the wrong approach. I think that by starting and using AI earlier on, you actually get the benefit of when cool things start to happen in 6, 12 months, you're on the forefront and you're able to apply those really cool use cases that give you an advantage ahead of everyone else. And so I think the approach that I would say is like the most important in terms of setting up yourself for success is start early, start with the use cases that we know will save you time, will add value to your process. And it's almost similar to people who started with Excel very early on. You start with Excel in the sense of like 2 + 2 = 4, and you do a bunch of different formulas. And then you have your level up where you start doing more complex equations within Excel. And then ultimately, when Excel starts being able to do macros and way more difficult things, you're at the forefront of that and you're able to apply those things. Now, the good news is it never gets as complex as having to build macros in AI, and it will actually be very easy for you to derive a lot of value. But the benefit is by starting earlier on, finding those use cases and where you can apply it in your process, you are then set up for the future curve of adoption where you're able to apply it to your process earlier and extract value way easier than most people will when they're buried amongst, this is all that AI can do, but I don't know how to apply it in my process, and I don't know what the best way to apply it is. And so I'd say my real one quick tip would be get started early and find out what those use cases and where it can get applied to your process are.
Yeah, I'd say to sort of add on to that, there was a study out of Microsoft, I think a few months ago, where they looked at coders that had adapted Copilot versus coders that were still trying to code in the more classic way. And coders that have integrated AI directly into the process are in the range of 50% more productive. I mean, like absolutely insane numbers. And just a ton of different ways. I mean, it helps with debugging, it helps with actually writing the code, it helps with getting things work so consistently. And it probably took those early adopters a little bit of time to get there. But it means that if you were a coder that was in the top 25%, you're now probably in the top 1%. If you were a coder that was in the top 1%, you're in the 0.1%, right? If you wait until every other coder is using this technology, then by the time you adopt, you're going to be in the bottom 25% or the bottom 0.1%. And I think that really applies across everything. It's the easiest to quantify it and measure it in coding because you can look at code output, you can look at stories done, a whole bunch of quantifiable measures. But the reality is this applies to all work. AI is making everything everywhere far better. And you can move fast and move a few standard deviations relative to your peers if you go now. If you wait, all it means is you're going to get back to average, and you're going to have to fight hard to get back to average. So I would second everything that George just said. This is a game where you don't want to be you don't want to be waiting. You want to take advantage while it gives you a chance to be at the front of the race, not take advantage when you're getting lapped.
That's actually a great transition into my next question, because this now brings it a little bit more internal for all of us. George, this is a question for you because you are working on the front lines with clients addressing real world problems every day. What do you think the next big leap is for agentic AI? Like what emerging trends or client requirements should we be paying attention to?
Yeah, I think it's funny because a few years ago, I think people, like everyone's heard of the Turing test, and if you haven't, it's like the world where if you talk to AI, it does it feel like you're talking to a human? Do you know that you're talking to AI or not? And I think for the most part, this was something like 5 years ago, people believed to be like absolutely impossible or was going to be really difficult to solve. I'm sure Josh was way at the forefront of this, so he probably knew that this was way already coming. But for the most part, most of us didn't know that this was something that was going to be easy to solve. And so I think now we've solved this. We're way past trying to answer the Turing test. People can talk to an AI and not know that it's an AI. But moving forward is going to be when you actually genuinely feel like this is someone at your desk who is like your friend that is supporting you throughout your process. I think where Josh was talking about like the next steps of Boosted or AI as a whole, if you can get something, picture that is personalized, real time, right there at your desk, where let's say I'm looking into Apple and I'm curious how will iPhone sales do, or I'm curious what's important to drive Apple's stock price. And I could call up on my phone an AI agent and ask it, what is going to drive Apple? It's responding to me in real time, telling me exactly what's important to me, and it knows how I look at the world. That is, I think, going to be the future of AI, and I think we're way closer to that than most people believe. And as soon as we start seeing that, I think it's going to be really widely adopted, and people who aren't using it are going to really struggle to remain competitive. And I'd say like the other big comment that I'd say is worthwhile to note for a lot of people as they evaluate AI, and I see this across a whole bunch of different clients, is it's important to realize that the term AI is like widely used, but not all AI is created equal, in the sense of like the way AI works is never, every company can use the word AI, but what you're actually getting as a product is very, very different in a lot of different places. Where you will occasionally have companies that popped up in like the last 6 months that claim to be AI-driven companies. And one of the things you'll likely see is that their outputs are not going to perform as well. One of the things that I'd say is like really important to look at whenever you're evaluating an AI product is look for explainability, make sure that you can understand how it's getting to its outputs, make sure that it's solving for hallucinations, make sure that the outputs that you're getting are valid and trustworthy, and make sure, and this is maybe something that is a personal opinion, but try and look for companies that existed in the AI space more than just the last year. They didn't just simply pop up around what is happening with LLMs in the world and claim this is going to be the future. I think one thing that like separates what we're able to do on our platform is we've been around for the last 7 years, and Josh's previous experience in Bloomberg, building models and so on, we've had the ability to build all sets of different tools. And then those tools now play into any sorts of questions that you ask an agent or any sorts of tasks that you're trying to solve. And so the two things, I'd say AI is going to become way more personalized. It's going to help you a lot with your decision making. But when you're looking for that AI that is going to support with that process, make sure that you're evaluating AI in terms of how exactly does it work? How is it going to be trustworthy in my process? And how do I know that this is the tool that I want to drive the decision making for me?
George, you hit on some really key points there. It's funny, I love playing with different AIs, writing songs, building all kinds of fun stuff. It's very entertaining, but those are all very low risk. If
Yeah.
I'm making a purchase decision or I'm rebalancing a portfolio, your point of understanding hallucination rates and risks associated is huge. And I think that's something that I would further double down on. That is a very good point to make, and something we all need to be aware of and be really evaluating for. That's fantastic. So I'm actually going to compress my series of questions because we have so many phenomenal questions from the audience. So what I'd like to do is get into a couple of them and share some of the audience questions with you. So let me see where we want to start. Okay, this is I think this is probably one of our most common questions. Is some variety of this. George, Josh, people most want to learn more about how other portfolio managers are using agentic AI. So when we think about how are people using it, what are some thoughts that you would share, just generally speaking, and maybe even classified as kind of different use cases? And because I think about a portfolio manager being somebody running a portfolio, we also see a lot of investment managers or even investment advisors utilizing it for more of a client communication or client service arena. So I guess I would think of it in terms of portfolio construction and performance focus versus client relations or client management focused.
Yeah, I'd say, at a high level, like it's extremely idiosyncratic. Like every portfolio manager is a little bit different from every other portfolio manager. If you're, more of a generalist PM of a $100 million hedge fund, you're going to have a very different mandate than if you're like a sector head in a multi-strat at a $5 billion hedge fund. So with that being said, I could talk in some fairly broad, I could give some very broad answers to that, but it will really depend heavily on your process. But I would say really broadly, using it for communication, using it for analyzing information that's happening in the world relative to some kind of thesis. So maybe you have a financial model with a bunch of assumptions built into it on where a company's going to go. you could use the system to scan through the world and find anything that could affect any of those assumptions. Maybe, your thesis is millennial gamers are going to be a big driver of purchasing over the next 5 years, using the system to continuously analyze everything happening with millennial gamers, seeing where their tastes are, seeing what's having success, and seeing which companies are best positioned. Maybe you're someone who has a belief about a particular drug affecting a company and a company's cash flows, using the system to scan through everything happening with that drug, how likely it is for that drug to get approved, whatever it is, teaching the system some thesis or some key thing that you're making decisions on, and then having the system scan through the world, read millions of words, and sort of instantly tell you when anything happens that affects that thesis. That's another sort of broad thing we see over and over again. And then I think the other way to think about it is kind of more of these sort of like high level macro effects. I have this watch list, I have this portfolio, just scan through the world and tell me about threats or things I'm maybe not aware of right now. Or, look at things happening upstream or downstream of my particular space, or scan through all earnings calls of things that are in different parts of the supply chain. So, if I was to circle all the way back to the beginning of the conversation, it still really comes down to automating drudgery, monitoring the world, or adding something net new, using the system to some kind of analysis you actually couldn't do today, and having it feed out. And then in terms of how that actually exists, it's ridiculously different per user. That said, George, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, I think you covered it. I'd say like a couple of agents, maybe like specific ones that people might be interested to hear about from like a PM standpoint that I find a lot of people find valuable are, and like you wouldn't have been able to do easily otherwise, is picture you've given me your 60 holdings in your portfolio. We can easily run an agent within like 5 minutes that will run every single day. And it's going to take a look at every single one of those holdings. It's going to read all of the SEC filings, and maybe it'll tell you, we can tell it to act, like we can ask any type of question, but an example of one that I know is valuable for a lot of PMs is insider sales. So across all of my 60 names, if I was showing you on a daily basis who is selling shares and how many shares have they sold and at what price, that is interesting information to me, or context add that otherwise would have been very difficult to do. We can do the same thing around like remuneration strategies or compensation. We can really ask any type of question, and the only limitation is the data that you have. And one of the really big advantages that we have as Boosted is the amount of data that we have access to. And so anything ranging from SEC filings to earnings to so on, those are all types of questions you can ask the system. And so really you can achieve a lot. But the one example would be like that insider sales that I know is valuable to a lot of PMs, and goes to your point of either automating drudgery or trying to give someone superpowers for their process.
That's super helpful, George. While I've got you speaking, I'm reading questions in real time, so I thank the audience for continuing to send these. Please do. These are fantastic. I'm going to slide this one in, which is just a recent question that came in from a prospect of ours. They ask, how much training do I need to use a Boosted or a system like this?
Yeah, it's actually, so I'd say generally most systems, when you come to a chat interface, you ask them questions. Here, it's a little bit different in that you need to ask it the process you want it to follow. So you specifically tell it to read all earnings for the S&P 500 and then maybe highlight to me all of the companies that had positive guidance in their last earnings call. That will then produce a table of, it'll have read all 500 earnings calls and produced an output for you. This is really significant in that it guides us to be able to produce outputs that nothing else on the market is able to produce. Most other systems are limited to like 5 or 10 articles. But where the training is just really learning how to prompt that like format of question. And whenever you sign on to the system, you get access to people like myself and our team, where we are able to support in terms of how do we build these agents. You're given all sorts of different documentation. And usually I'd say within like 2-3 sessions of meeting with us, people are pretty comfortable creating their own prompts and building out their own agents and getting value out of those.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is there's a little bit of a skill curve where when you first come in, you're gonna get a bit of value. where you work with someone like George and they'll build a few automations. But it's really interesting. The longer you're in the system, the more value you're going to get. And the reason is because there's things you can do in the system that you can't even really contemplate today. And it's not until you start doing this other kind of analysis that was just straight up not possible, that you start to really truly unlock. So you can get some value really quickly. You can figure out how to build prompts in the system. You can figure out how to build agents. But what we're finding is with some of the users that have been on it a little bit longer, they're coming up with use cases I didn't even imagine was possible, to be honest, when we first started building it, and are doing things that are completely net new. And so the limit is actually not how hard is this product to use. It's a very easy product to use. The limit is more around creativity. And what are things that I can't do today that I would have liked to be able to do? Or what are pieces of information I would have wished I could have looked at that I can't, or that would be additive, or that would be different? Or, if I can literally create a system that can read every piece of text in the world, I can literally read through billions of words, what are conclusions I would have loved to have been able to get out of that, that I couldn't today? And there's just so many different idiosyncratic examples that it's hard to sort of call them all out. But I'd say there's a lot of people that are already being fairly creative outside of agentic AI. You've got people that are doing things where, they might look at like corporate websites of how pricing for different products existed over time. Or you've got people that, are looking at management compensation. They're looking at activist investors, and they're trying to understand like how those activist investors behave historically. You can do creative things like that in our system as well, but now you can just scale up how you do it in a way that you really couldn't think about before. So there's the quick answer, which is like, it's very easy to learn how to come in and build one or two agents. It's very easy to work with George and build out something. And then there's a longer answer, which is the longer you use this, the better you get at it, the more value you get. And it's amazing how quickly that can snowball.
Yeah, that's excellent. And it's funny because that transitions into this question, which is a two-part question from a prospect of ours that just came in. I'll answer the first part, but I'm going to pivot the second to the other two of you. First part was, what agents are most common in the investment space to increase the effectiveness of decision making? And I'll start with that one just because I'm very excited about this. We've released just recently an agent library, which is essentially a library of a number of agents that are the most common that our clients use. Now, those are effectively a starting point, which will lead us into the second part of the question, which is how bespoke do you believe the most effective or efficiency related agents need to be? How much you need to hone them in? So I think this is a great point that we'll get you prompted with an initial agent that you can work off of, but then how you train it from there is where it becomes bespoke or becomes yours. Either of you, Josh or George, one of you like to jump in with a response to that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'd say, oh, go ahead, George.
No, you go ahead. You go ahead. I'll add on afterwards if there's anything.
Yeah, I'd say it's really similar to the answer I just gave, where generally speaking, you're going to come in, you're going to start with something that's a little high level. So maybe, summarize all the earnings calls for things that are happening in my portfolio, or maybe read through every piece of context you can get on a company for it versus its peers, and create a SWOT analysis, or maybe scan through every context you can get in a company to help me build out a DDIQ, right? Like these are all examples of things that people do, and depending on what your process looks like and how you think about the world might be valuable for you. But the truly idiosyncratic thing, and where you're going to start getting more and deeper value, is the more distinct and unique it becomes to you. Where it's like, hey, I have this one specific thesis about a company that I don't think anyone else has figured out, and I want you to help me do the detective work for it. Or I have this one specific metric that I have figured out is really important for this company, and it's hard to figure out that metric, and I want this thing to do. Like to kind of like call out some examples, figuring out the average age of data centers for a set of companies could potentially be a really hard process, right? It exists hypothetically if you scan through all the corporate filings related to something, but it's really, really hard to figure out by hand on your own. It would require a huge amount of effort. All of a sudden, you have a system that can act as a partner to figure something like that out. You would only be able to get to that point of realizing you could use the system in that way, though, after you sort of interact with it a little bit. So high level, really quickly, you can get some general agents that are valuable for you. But the longer you work with it, the longer you build something very custom, the longer you learn some of these new capabilities, the more value you're going to get. So the answer is, again, just think of it as kind of a sliding scale. There's value at kind of a general high level, and then it's going to get deeper value the longer you integrate. Sorry, George, I feel like I probably stole most of your thunder, but if you want to.
No, you're good. I think, yeah, that really is it. Maybe like a good example. I had a client I was talking to yesterday around like commentaries. So far we've talked a lot about like agents. They're pretty difficult things to do. Commentaries are something that a lot of people do. But we actually like excel at producing in terms of like our format because you have the ability to access so much different data. So I think like on one hand, if you asked it to produce a commentary on the 60 holdings in a portfolio, it can do that really easily. The benefit of creating something bespoke is you can then tell it, hey, I want you to create a commentary that follows the structure that I typically want. I want the section on financial performance. I want the section on what has happened within the news. I want the section on what are some big developments in the companies that I own. I want the section on XYZ. When you create an agent that is bespoke to you, you ultimately automate more of the drudgery that you want to automate out. And so I think that creating bespoke things often isn't actually as hard as it sounds, but can get you a lot of value by following that process. And so commentaries are a really simple example of something that you can easily do. It'll create a commentary that thinks is valuable versus you can specifically tell it a version of commentary that you want produced that you think your clients will resonate with. And then that ultimately is something that it'll follow that structure and produce an output for.
Thank you, George. That actually also addresses another question that came in, which was what is the most important application of AI for RIAs? And I think the most important application is subjective to your particular needs. But what George has hit on, which is a commentary, is probably one of the more common applications of AI, and particularly in Boosted, the ability to read your portfolios and produce either a requested commentary based on the construction of that portfolio or an agentic response where it will notify you of any balances or weightings have gone out of skew, and it will also proactively produce a commentary for you. So that's addressing one other question that was hit in the chat. But I think we have time for one more, and I'm going to try to combine two in here because I think these two work well together from two different people. One is from a client of ours, and another comes from a prospect. And one of them was, how can advisors create their own agents while staying compliant? And I would love to shamelessly plug. We've had our SOC 2 Type 1 for a while. Now we've just recently announced last week we've achieved and gained our SOC 2 Type 2, which is something that will feed into that response, I'm sure. But in addition to that, how does Agentic AI address accuracy? So it's a matter of compliance and accuracy. I'm going to pull those together to see if we can address two different questions in one since we're running out of time.
Yeah. So really quickly, compliance is a little bit different firm to firm, and everyone's got their own requirements. But actually, I think that puts us in a unique position to be compliant. And the reason it puts us in a unique position to be compliant is kind of three main things. Thing number one, everything is highly customizable. So the set of information that we're looking at, the way that it's producing the reports, the types of analysis it does, you can customize 100% of it. And you do that in a really simple way by just interacting with the system. Number two, our results are 100% auditable. There is a source, a citation, a piece of information that feeds into any fact that we're stating at the front of the screen. So it's really easy to verify that the system is valid and following whatever compliance requirements you have. And then number three, we've invested really heavily into the hallucination problem, the problem of AI basically stating something that's incorrect. And really quickly, the way that technology works, we've got a whole stack of stuff that kind of understands your intent, builds out a plan, and tries to execute on that plan. We've got another stack of technology that scans through whatever we iterate, whatever we stated, tries to find any kind of facts that we need to verify. And then we have a third piece of technology that basically acts as a fact checker that basically verifies of these facts that we just stated, can we verify them in high quality information? And so what that means is, depending on your particular compliance requirements, you can tell the system you're only allowed to get information from these sources. You're only allowed to analyze things based on these sources. And you can, opine on this, you can't opine on that. And then at the end of it, you can basically verify that not only did it give exactly what you wanted, followed your requirements, but you can audit it and actually show to an external system, this definitely matches these requirements, and here's how I know that. right? And so basically, I actually think our product is pretty uniquely positioned to be helpful from a compliance standpoint. Again, your particular firm, we've got hundreds of customers at this point. I've seen every variation of DDIQ and compliance that's probably imaginable. So there's going to be all kinds of idiosyncratic things in terms of what that means for your firm. But at a high level, you need technology like ours to be able to match different requirements, different compliance requirements.
That is fantastic. We are just about at time. So I'd like to just take this opportunity to thank both of you, George, Josh. Thank you for joining. I'd also like to thank everybody in the audience who's joined and sent questions. These are super helpful. I know that we did not get to even a fraction of the questions that were asked. We will be following up. We'll reach out to each of you directly, and we look forward to speaking with you on those topics. Uh, as I do close this, it is very clear that agentic AI is driving a lot of excitement, and there's a lot of important lessons for us to watch out for. If I were to summarize what I heard in this call, AI is doing three main things, particularly in the finance world. It's automating mundane work, allowing you to offload mundane tasks and actually achieve those in a faster period of time. Number two, it's providing real-time monitoring, whether it be against a portfolio composition or whether it be against a current portfolio's performance in the market. And then number three, it's giving you superpowers, allowing you to do the things, even in points 1 and 2, that you couldn't achieve in a normal timeline before. I mean, to put things into context, reading 10 million words, as Josh noted earlier, which happens in a snap of a finger. Well, for a human to do that, it would take something like 12 days if you're reading nonstop. I couldn't stay awake for 12 days. I know that. And I certainly couldn't read for 12 days straight. So for me, that's something really exciting. And in addition to that, I couldn't hire 24 people to work 12 half days to make it work. So for me, AI is allowing us to read and do things in seconds that used to take hours or days or weeks. And to me, that's a very exciting time. With that said, again, I'll thank everybody in the audience. I'll thank the people who joined us, Josh and George. And I look forward to following up with everybody who's expressed interest and questions on agentic AI. Thank you for joining today.
Thanks, guys.